Hey folks, David here with Tomb Runner's Design Diary 8. So today I worked on um, finishing up the potions and scrolls pages. This has explains the differences in the two. I mentioned that potions, they're both items that anyone can use for magical effects, or in the potions case, magical or non-magical. Potions can be a normal explosive or a smoke bomb, or they could have a magical effect like a polymorph potion. And potions, you can drink them, you can throw them, you can douse a target with them. Scrolls, let's see. So potions, they work without using an action roll to cast the spell. If you just drink a potion, it just works. But if you throw the potion, that would be an agility action roll to see if you hit the target. Um, But scrolls require a spellcasting roll with mind to read the scroll successfully. The difference in a scroll and regular casting a spell, you don't have to have the spellcasting feat to use a scroll. You just roll with your mind stat and see how well you can cast the spell from the scroll. The other difference is scrolls don't cost SP. They don't cost stress points to cast. So if you are if you take the mystic job as your character job and you are a spellcaster, you can basically convert supply into extra spells that don't cast any stress to cast. So it's a very potent power boost if you build your character specifically towards scrolls. Let's see what else. There's one table here that can be used for potions or scrolls, um, and they are different spells, different effects. Some of them are non-magical for the case of potions that aren't magical. Um, and you can also take the alchemist job. I mentioned the mystic job makes scrolls. The alchemist job makes potions, and they can make any alchemist can make non-magical potions. And if you have a spellcasting feat, you can make potions of that school of magic, just like with scrolls and enchanters. You can also use the magic item table page to roll other um, effects for your potions, scrolls. And this table also has curses if you want to have a scroll with double, good and bad effect, or a potion that could backfire and cause a bad effect. I also changed up the jobs page a fair bit. I cleaned up some things and mainly was thinking about the economy of supply in this game, since supply governs your character growth, your leveling up. Um, a big part of downtime is the intentional push and pull of spending supply for character power directly with leveling up versus spending it for in-game power through things like preparing your equipment, crafting new items, crafting scrolls, crafting potions. So most of the jobs, all of the jobs interact with downtime. That's the role of what your job is as a character. That is what the mechanical purpose for a job selection is. So I changed. Alchemist used to give you double usage on potions that you crafted, and I simplified that. Now you just have to be an alchemist to craft potions. Before, it was worded in a way that made it sound like anyone could craft potions. An alchemist could just make potions that had two effects or two uses, and that's not great. Um, so now it's in line with things like engineer, where you can craft simple mechanical gadgets, constructs, or weapons. If you wanted to put a simple blunderbuss into the game, engineer would be the way you would do that, because black powder is an item in the game. So explosives, that kind of thing, are very common. Um, the enchanter is the way you imbue items, make magic items directly. If you have uh, a piece of equipment that you want to put a magical effect or a spell into, you do that way. And then the mystic is how you craft scrolls. Um, they're all the same cost now. It's all one supply per tier. So if you want to put a level 2 tier 2 fireball spell onto a scroll, it would cost 2 supply. Um, and there's a natural feedback loop of you sell loot, so you gain supply. You can work in downtime as one of your actions, gain supply. and then you spend that supply before going back out adventuring to the next tomb. And then the other one that got changed a lot was the blacksmith. The blacksmith used to basically reduce the repair cost for all equipment down to one. Instead of one per item, which is the base, it was just one supply would repair all of your equipment if you were a blacksmith, which is a little too generous now. The blacksmith can just get an additional tier on their crafted items. So if you take blacksmith and craft an armor, shield, or a weapon, it's automatically one tier higher. So that's a reduction of one supply in cost for all your crafted items. And that doesn't sound like a big bonus if you're crafting like one item, but when you're crafting a lot of smaller items, that adds up a lot, and that's a lot of player power. It also means they could craft. Well, you can't do zero, so I was gonna say you could do free level tier one items if you gamed it, but there's no tier zero items, so you can't do that. You can baseline craft tier two as a blacksmith. The others are entertainer. They can instead of just working where you gain one supply as a passive bonus, basically, if you have an extra action, you can work and you gain one supply. The entertainer gains one supply plus one reputation with someone in the audience. So that's a great role playing centric with the same mechanical bonus as well, because supply, obviously mechanical, reputation is a mechanical system in this game too. And then you have nobles where they work, they earn 1d4 supply. So they can theoretically earn 4 supply every time they work, up to 4 supply every time they work, which is a huge bonus. But they give up all the other options like crafting bonuses. Thief is another. They get +1 supply when they sell stolen goods, and that could stack if they're selling multiple stolen items. That's balanced out by items you find in a tomb aren't stolen. You have to be stealing it from another source, a shop or townsperson, something like that. That one's a little up to GM's discretion, and I'll probably try to nail that down a little tighter. It was previously a bonus to heist actions, like any thievery rolls you would get an advantage on if you scoped out a place during downtime. But that leads more towards, that was directly inspired by something like Blades in the Dark, some of their character abilities, whereas this game is not as directed at city play. You could definitely do that with this game, but I didn't want any core player decisions that would not be applicable to the general game flow and the type of what's the word I'm trying to think of? The direction I'm trying to have the game aimed at as far as what players are doing typically in this game. And it also didn't feel as interactive or direct for job downtime bonus like the rest of them did. If you were the thief, it's like, oh, well, I guess I did nothing, but I get a bonus later. Whereas everything else is an immediate bonus. The one weird one I'll point out again is the soldier, where they just get +2 item slots. And that doesn't sound like it's a downtime bonus, but when you think about the general loop, the gameplay loop, that's what I was trying to think of earlier. Being you go out adventure, you gather treasure, you come back and sell it. Having +2 item slots over the default 5 is a huge bonus, and that just gets better and better as you get higher tier loot, because even at tier 2, if you get 2 tier 2 items, that's 4 more supply you gained when you came back to town and sold than the other players that were limited. And that also lets you take more stuff into battle, just like the crafting jobs give you more things to take into your tombs and your adventures. So that one seems a little out of place with the others until you think about the implications both in tombs and when you come back to downtime in cities and villages, and what it can give you as a mechanical bonus with the increased supply from selling stuff. Let's see. The druid one, it lets your healing apply to both HP and SP. So both health points and stress points heal in the wilderness when you do a healing roll, instead of having to choose and split the healing between the two. Druids, if they spend their downtime in the wilderness, they heal both with their healing. which is flavorful and mechanically very strong, but they do have that give of, if a druid spends their downtime in wilderness, they're not selling stuff in the city. They're not doing other city-based or village, society based downtime activities. That also makes druids really good for hex crawl style play. If you're journeying a lot and your downtime is spent not in the city, then they get a big bonus to their healing, and they could use their other downtime activities for other things instead of having to just heal multiple times or spend extra supply on healing, I should say, because you can only heal once. It's tied to your level. It's 1d6 per level. You could spend one supply to heal plus 1d6 on top of that. So druids generally are going to heal a lot better unless they roll really poorly. Let's see, what else? I also added a lot of little design flourishes throughout the book. A lot more these little layout elements that make it look more like an old book and look more kind of ragged, worn and torn. It looks a little busy in some spots, I think, and I need to kind of really dial in. But here on the page, you can see the little torn page design and the little folds in the middle and on the borders between the outside of the screen and right beside the text. That page graphic, that's new, and I've added a couple more, like here at the top for equipment. There's a little border there, just little design elements that really separate the page and help it flow. Here's another page where I added it. This is part of the equipment pages, and they just make the page look a little more full and a little more finished. Or in the case of the spellcasting page, it makes it look like a banner, which was the goal at the beginning of the book. I'll show you in the actual book. I used that same aesthetic for the core rules to really, call attention to that, as well as the dice mechanics page. I did change. I love this art, but I moved it to another part of the game. It's now the art beside the monsters page. And then there on that side, beside dice mechanics on the same spread, because it makes sense, I added the D6 gelatinous cube as a D, showing the die faces for pips. So that'll look really good opposite the dice mechanics page. So it'll look like that, basically. This has been really handy. This iPad mini, and it's almost the exact same size as an A5 book. So for proofing design, as well as the PDF version, it's been nearly identical in size. I think the aspect ratio is a little different. That's the main thing. But as far as screen size, it's really close to A5. Let's see, what else? The next thing I'm working on, so I've had people ask about funnel play and like level 0 characters in Tomb Runners, and I've had a couple of ways of doing that. The easiest way is you roll 1d6 for HP, 1d6 for SP. You start with 0 luck, 0 supply, so you have fully random core stats. You roll a 1d4 for a stat bonus and 1d4 for a stat penalty, so you have the same spread of advantage, disadvantage as a regular character. But you have no heritage, no job, and then a table for one random feat, and they're chosen from 20 of the kind of stereotypical most common feats. And then if you reach level 1, if your character survives the funnel or whatever, then you would add you would go up to the normal 7 HP, 7 SP starting point, choose your heritage, job, and feats, and then gain 3 supply worth of items. You would start with 2 1 supply items, 2 tier 1 items. So just a very basic weapon and armor or something like that, or 1 scroll and, that kind of thing. The random feats do include spellcasting, even though those cost two normally, because having a funnel play where every character is non magic wouldn't be very fun. But the other idea I had was, um, depending on how you play this game, level one is already very brutal, and it can be very deadly, brutal, um, high fatality gameplay. So I thought about doing a life path character generator, where it would be a one-page life path system where you roll up your heritage, job, feats, items, and then as well some role play elements like their age, their fears, their flaw, and their goal, or what's their character desire. Um, and then that would give you, from just like a handful of probably D6 rolls, a full character. Um, the only thing that's hard there is the feats and the stat allocation, because you would want those to somewhat match up. You don't want a random character. So I'd have to figure out, maybe you would roll your stats to see what you get a bonus in and what you get a penalty in. And then based on where your bonus is, roll for feats. And then you would end up with a character that is balanced towards that stat. That's one idea. But I really like the idea of having a life path character generation system on a one page layout. And then the next thing I'm working on, you can see here, these, I'm working in my proof book that has extra blank pages here. I just put some filler art and left a bunch of pages blank to see what it looks like at 100 pages, 150 pages, all that. I use it as a workbook journal to come up with new things. So this was the NPC rival runners pages I was working on. Let's see, hex crawls. I'm doing hex crawl system, as well as a tomb crawl page where you can roll for what you come across in the tombs. Um, Generally, I don't want the game to revolve around that kind of slow tomb crawling, dungeon crawling. That's why it's called Tomb Runners. I want it to be more about authored encounters and not as much random. See what happens based on the dice and timetables. But I know a lot of players will want to do that kind of play, so I'm going to have a page that supports that for them. And then also, lastly, for today, I started sketching out player handouts. And basically, you'll just need a couple sheets of paper, 4 sheets, basically. Um, the core rules will be one page, front and back. I've shown that previously. I could show you again in case you didn't see that video. I think they're right here, and I may be wrong. I know where they're at. So here is the other proof copies, um, the GM screen, character sheets. So here are the core rules. This is all you need at the table to reference during play. It's like 960 words total for all of the gameplay rules. Um, Here's another draft of the spreads that I was working on in between prints of the actual booklet. And here is the first printed working copy, where it's just a couple pieces of art and text. There was basically no layout, no design yet. And this was just about a month ago, a month and a half at most, 5 weeks, I think, was when I printed this, had this printed, my buddy. So it's moving very quickly. Went from that to this with the near finalized layout, at least for this pass. Anyways, so you'll have one page front and back core rules, and then you will have a character creation page that will have a list of your heritage, jobs, feats, and then the back will have an items list and spell lists. And then, so that's what you would hand out to the players so they could go through quickly with their character sheets. Then there'll be a GM sheet that'll have GM guidance on the front, talking through the different systems, reminding you like how to use clocks and stuff like that, or giving examples of consequences, that kind of thing. And then the back will have blank clocks to use during play, so you can keep track of what's the threats in this scene and all. And then there will be a player sheet that'll have similar. It'll have a character sheet on front, which is very simple. You just have your stats, your name, your HP, SP, luck, supply, your four stats, which one you just mark which one you have a advantage and which one you have a disadvantage. And then a space for your heritage, your job, and your feats. And then two-sided items inventory. You got 5 items and 5 consumables. The items have their tier and their wear, so you can track like how strong is this sword and how worn is it. And then the consumables just have their tier because they're all one use. And then the back of the character sheets will have, same as the GM guidance, it'll have a list of player tips. And what I mean by player tips, if you've ever seen the Monster of the Week player sheets, have some of the best, those are in this folder. The Monster of the Week GM and player sheets have some of the best role playing guidance I've seen. They show you what you can do, but they also tell you what you should be doing as a player in the game. How do you approach this game? What's cool? What is the approach you should have as a player to participate in this game as a productive party member? That kind of thing. And that sounds a little too prescriptive, but it's written in a really helpful way. And it has a list of all the moves because it's a PBTA, powered by the Apocalypse game. But it also says like, what's your agenda as a character in this world? That kind of stuff I want to put on the back of the character sheets here for players, reminding you, spend like so. For example, one of the core tenets of being a player in Tomb Runners is spend your resources. This is not Final Fantasy 16-bit RPG where you hoard all your Phoenix Downs and full heals and revives and antidotes and all that till the very last boss, and then you end the game with 100 of them. Use your resources. There'll be more. You'll find more stuff. Your characters are going to be really weak and probably not last a long time if you don't spend things like stress, if you don't use your items wear, if you don't use your consumables aggressively. You're probably not going to last long in Tomb Runners if you are timid with your supply and resources. So that's like one little tip that would be on the back. It's like use your stuff. It'll help you survive. You'll be able to do cooler stuff. You'll be able to do cooler things if you aren't scared to spend supplies and resources. Let's see. That's all for now. Covered a lot here, but I've been working on a lot. I've got a lot done recently, and I'm getting, let's see, the Dungeon Master's deck. I finally got tracking update on it. It'll be here at the end of this week for the new edition of that with the updated graphics. And then I'll have the new version of the proof, the printed proof. I'm getting one done about every 2 weeks to keep a rolling track of progress, and make changes as I see it printed. So like the stuff I added today for all the little graphical layout flourishes will be in the next proof printed, and I can see, does this need to maybe not be on this page, is too much clutter, or just move it up a little. Most of that I could do on the iPad and on the laptop on the screen, but some of it you don't know for sure until you see it printed. Like for instance, in this proof, my edges are all off on the top and bottom. They're right and they're too far on the side. Despite following the layout guidelines, I've noticed the bleed areas are not accurate with this printer, so I have to adjust accordingly and keep getting proofs done until it all lines up perfectly. And this is not let's see, I've had this was a different print, and this was a third print. So I've had 3 different rounds of proof prints done so far for the book, and they were done in Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Columbia, South Carolina. All 3 different, pretty close in quality. I like the pages from this one the most. The color and I like the color on this one. The thickness is not great. The thickness was the best on this one. The page stock, paper stock is the best. And then I like the cover material the best on this one. It's a very nice matte. Originally I wanted to do glossy, but the matte looks more like an old book and feels like an old book, and it has a better hand feel. The glossy feels a little too slippery in hand. This feels really nice. It's um, almost felt lined. It's got a really good texture to it. This one just feels like paper. The printing quality is good, but the feel is not great. Whereas this one has a really nice feel, and these are both matte, but they're definitely a different material. The binding is also pretty different across these. And that's one thing I have not explored, the different binding options. They're all fine when you open them. They all look, no matter what part of the book you open to, it opens well. The inner bleed, which I did account for in the templating and layout. Inner bleed means you lose stuff here in this fold. So you want to make your layouts a little farther towards the outer page than the inner page. So instead of just perfectly centering your layout, you want to have it moved over a couple millimeters. I think it's like 18 versus 15, 15 on the outer, 18 on the inner, 18 millimeters. I think that's what I went with for A5 booklets. But that all changes depending on your binding and everything like that, because some binding has a worse center gap there, and some of it lays a little flatter and has a lesser effect. And it's mostly a concern with artwork, if there's any bleed over on artwork, because then things don't look right. You're missing like part of your center of your image. But but also just with text, when the pages are folded over and sitting open, if you move it over a little bit, it actually looks more centered and better. That's it for now. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and get back to work on let's see, what was I working on next? Next to do is the hex crawl and the tomb crawl pages for generating that for players that like to play more fly by the seat of their pants, and the GMs that want to have that kind of exploration based play. And I'll make a video in a couple days updating on that, as well as maybe have the DM's deck in by then. Appreciate you. Talk to you soon.